Welcome back to The Great Conversation. We're excited to be diving into The Clouds by Aristophanes. And to kick it off, get the audience maybe caught up on where we're at, give us a quick synopsis of The Clouds.
It's a comedy by Aristophanes, you said. Yeah, and we talked about the Apology and then Credo as well, the last two episodes. But
check out those episodes.
Yeah. This is actually, in time frame, happens before those two works happen. Comedy, obviously, not being satire, not being tragedy. It's supposed to have some humor, some sarcasm, pulling from, at the time, what's happening in culture, and people can relate to different things, see characters that are being made fun of. They have some oopsie-daisy moments in it, but it should not end with somebody dying. It should not be a tragedy. It should end more merrily.
Yes.
And so with this work, actually, I was kind of reading about it, and that's not exactly what happened. This work was not accepted well by the audience of the time in Athens or in Dionysus because it was not as humorous as most comedies, and then it didn't end super happily either, with the Thinkery being burned down. And Strepsiades obviously being beat up by his son.
Yes.
And things not working out very well for him.
Yeah.
When he had all of these debts to pay and his son just kept borrowing money from people. And so he says, oh my goodness, the end of the month's coming, the old and the new day. And so I need to go to the Thinkery and learn from Socrates the wrong argument that can get me out of anything. He doesn't really actually want to learn, and he's not good at learning. And when he goes to the Thinkery, there's just so much ridiculousness happening there. Socrates, being someone very astute, takes himself very seriously, but then all the students are just doing these weird things and
telling weird stories.
They have their, heads in the ground, essentially. And so just some mockery going on. And then he's not good at learning. Strepsiades is not good at learning. So he sends his son into the Thinkery to learn the wrong argument. He learns the wrong argument very well, well that he actually comes back home and starts beating up his dad. And we kind of end there with and then the Thinkery being burned down. So I feel like there's just so much to take away from this comedy.
Let's take it character by character. Do you think that would be a good way to approach it? Because otherwise we're going to be all over the place.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so let's start with Strepsiades. Okay. Do you think that the result, we're going to go from the beginning to the end. Do you think the result of him being beat, of him ended up burning down the Thinkery, right? Do you think that was a result of bad parenting and bad character?
Yeah, I definitely think bad character, which I think can then bleed out into bad parenting.
Yeah.
We talk about this all the time with our parenting. Parenting is the absolute hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life.
Yes.
And people call it the terrible twos, or we called it the tough twos. Our oldest son is now almost 4 in August, and this actually seems like the hardest phase that we're in. And as I talk to other parents, I learned that it actually just keeps getting harder and harder. And I've heard someone say that now that his children are married, this is actually the hardest phase, because now he has the dynamics of children-in-law, and then there's grandchildren, and having to watch your children parent and giving them some advice on how to parent or advice on life, and just that dynamic is even harder. So I think realizing that as we learn as people, we have to have good character, because everything in our life is going to bleed out of that character. Everything that we interact with or do, if we don't have good character. And I think this is so funny, because in the work, actually, the wrong argument and the right argument in my translation, which I think it's also called like just and unjust and superior and inferior in some translations. The wrong argument is essentially saying that virtue is boring. It's archaic. It's the way of old, and virtue doesn't get you anything. And he even likens it to, I think one of Homer's characters, or one of the gods, actually, I think that he was so virtuous, but then in the bed, he was just so boring that like his wife had to go find another man because he was so virtuous that he was boring. In a sense. So I think that in this work, all the way back to the 400s BCs, we're seeing like that virtue is something that we've struggled with as a culture of, do we want to pursue virtue and do we want to have good character, or do we want to not and convince ourselves that it's so much better on the other side where there's no virtue? And so I think with Strepsiades, or Strepsiades, however we want to say it, the question was, did he have good character? And I would say no. And that bled out into his parenting and into his interactions with the people of society and his
Yeah.
business deals.
Yeah, 100%. I think it comes down to where does our character begin? Where do we begin to form good character?
When we are 3.
Yeah.
Or 2.
Yeah.
You know, whenever we start learning as people about how life works and how society works and how as people, what, you know, we have, again, this always goes back to the foundation. Where's our foundation? Where are we getting those rights and wrongs from? Yeah. And that's going to mold and make our character. And so as we parent our children, helping them understand what we do and why we do it, and what we shouldn't do and why we shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Because children want an answer. One thing that our son always says when we tell him to do something or not to do something is why. And I know as parents, when we hear that over and over and over, our gut response is because I said so. Because to actually stop and tell him why or why not takes effort. It takes reflection. It takes us knowing why. And I think a lot of times we don't know. And that's even set us up for, okay, we should not tell him to do or not to do something unless we have a good foundation of why or why not. Because if it's just, I'm lazy and I don't want to do it right now, you know, he wanted to put on a different pair of socks this morning that were in the laundry room. They were in the dryer still because I had just washed them from the day before. And I said, no, you can't change your socks. The socks you have on are fine. And he said, why? And I said, because I just don't want to get off the couch and go do it.
At least you were honest.
Yeah.
I would say when we look at Phidippides, that it is proof that character starts very young, because the character of him at whatever age, I'm not sure if it references his age according to the story, he is now a further amplification of his characterless dad.
Okay.
Right? I mean, he wants everything. He needs everything. He feels no responsibility for his actions or himself. And then he ends up turning around and beating his dad and says, you beat me, so I'm going to beat you. And I've heard it said that discipline without relationship will breed resentment. And that's exactly what we're seeing out of Phidippides. So if you tell your child, hey, go sit in the corner for a timeout, but that's the only thing you've said to them in the past 3 hours, that's no relationship. You know, if you've been playing with them and hanging out with them and spending time with them, and then, you know, there's a spat that breaks out between brother and brother, and then you tell the child to go sit in the corner. Well, now you've done it based within a relationship. And we see the resentment bred in Phidippides, and how his dad was always probably ranting on about his mom and about him and about all the debts that this ridiculous child has caused me. And I mean, he just rants about him extensively in the opening lines of the work.
To the point where he even says, what is it, Dad? Like,
what do you want this time? What are you ragging on about this time?
So I will ask you what you think about a part of the story that I really had to stop and look into myself about how we parent.
Okay.
Strepsiades says, I've been buying you a horse and cart ever since you were a young boy. I bought you your first horse and cart when you asked, like a little toy that he played with. And in his opinion, I've been taking care of you. I've been giving you whatever you want this whole time. Why are you acting this way?
Yeah.
I think that begs the question, what is the reason of, why was that a correlation of like, okay, I give you everything you want and now you treat me like this and you go and spend all my money. Strepsiades clearly didn't have the answer.
Yes.
But what is our answer of how we raise our children with giving them gifts? Does this go back to the relationship thing? Because can children be spoiled? You know, I always say we use that word so lightly. We're like, oh, I'm going to spoil my grandchildren or whatever. Like, spoiled is bad. We throw spoiled food out.
Yes.
And is society going to throw our children out when they're spoiled, you know?
You mean when they hit the real world, is society going to spit them out because they cannot cope with the realities of society?
Right. Yeah. So that line of, I bought you this horse and cart even when you were a young boy, why are you treating me like this at an older age? What can we learn from that? How we treat our children, how we give them gifts, how we love on them, and how can we make sure that we don't spoil them? Like, do gifts really spoil children, or was there something else there or not there?
At this neutral table, without a child present and without our children being adults, we're going to have this discussion, right? We don't know the results of what we're about to say, but we can at least kind of think through it, see history, and talk from there. So just a little disclaimer, right? There's a lot of adages in the world: teach a man to fish or give him a fish, right? So in this situation, we see that Strepsiades has given his son everything, but never taught him maybe where it came from, how he got it, what the process was. I think you're right about the relationship aspect. And I think about a lot of people say that in regards to faith, you only go to God when you need something. And that creates a sour relationship, because then when God doesn't give it to you, when you don't get that thing you've been wanting and praying for, then who are you mad at? You're mad at God, right? But if you have a relationship with God, if you have a relationship with an individual, then when they don't give you that thing, well, you've been having conversation and your heart is open and you're having dialogue and you're, in the sense of our faith, you're reading the word and you're getting your heart changed and you're learning new things. And so when you don't receive that thing, you've had research, you've had relationship to maybe help you understand why that timing didn't come with that thing. And so I think in regards to Phidippides and Strepsiades, I think maybe if at one point he said, hey, buddy, we're going to hold off on new wheels for the chariot this year. If they had a relationship, he could say, hey, Dad, tell me why can't we get new wheels? My paint's a little scuffed. And he could say, well, buddy, this is this and that, and here's this and that, and, blah, 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 right? There's relationship there. There's dialogue. There's understanding with how the world works. And I think that's the greatest asset we could equip our children with, is understanding of the way economy and relationship and culture and society functions. And so I think relationship and education, not the educational system, the education of a parent to a child. That is the most valuable thing I think you could do. And again, like I said, this is in a vacuum. We've never done this. We're parents learning as we go, counseling with our parents, trying to learn along the way. But that is what I think.
So let's talk about Socrates and his character.
Yeah. I think they painted him to be a bit of I guess the word would be a bit of a boob, kind of just like a goofy, kind of ridiculous person. But the interesting thing is, even though that was what I think they were trying to paint him because they wanted him to look that way in society, we come to find out that they didn't like him. They wanted him to be condemned. They wanted him to be exiled or killed. He still, I feel like, came out of the whole work with more character than anybody else. I think he was shown as somebody to be thoughtful, even though they wanted him to look ridiculous in his thoughtfulness. The examples they used, like the fly in the slippers and the lizard craps on his face, and he's hovering above the room to look at the clouds and look at the earth. They try and make him ridiculous, but at the same time, you see somebody who's thoughtful about life, who's inquiring about why things work. I mean, I think the reason, again, if we're taking this at semi-face value, the reason they would say he didn't trust in the gods is because he thought deeper about why the clouds and the thunder clapped and the lightning struck. And so they were like, oh, he's an atheist because he's explaining away the gods. But really, he was just being thoughtful, was my thought process.
Yeah, and I don't agree that Socrates was supposed to be comedic in that sense. I think he was very serious in this work. And it wasn't until much later that he was tried, and they, in a sense, used this work looking back to kind of support their argument at the time. Interesting.
Even though it was set up as a comedy, they still used basically a rom-com to prove him wrong, right? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you is, did Socrates teach rebellion, or did he teach critical thinking? Because the way that Phidippides responds to his teaching looks like he taught rebellion, which is why Athens didn't like Socrates. What are your thoughts?
I think that everything in retrospective is always a little bit clearer, right? So today and through the hundreds and hundreds of years that we have lived since Socrates, there's been time for people to step away from the current culture of the time, the war that was going on at the time, the thought processes that were going on at the time, the movement in science. And so, of course, we can look back at Socrates and say he was a critical thinker. Yeah. He was just asking questions. That's what we're supposed to do, empirical science. And we're supposed to look at the world that we live in and deduce,
Yeah.
And so, of course, that's what he was doing. But at the time, he was ruffling a lot of feathers.
Great point.
And so we talked about this in our previous 2 episodes. And so I think we go through that now, right? When a new idea has been presented to a society, and do we accept it? Do we refute it?
That's a great point.
Do we just sit on it for a while?
Yeah.
And so at the time, yes, he was corrupting the minds of the youth.
Yeah.
They're deities of the time that were so important to them, that were the foundation of pretty much everything they believed, and all of the works that they referenced, and the reasoning that they had for the way that they lived. And yet he's saying, no, there's more than these gods that we talk about, that pretty much act just like we do. There has to be more, because what happens when Zeus is out of lightning bolts, Yeah. But yet the lightning still comes.
Yeah.
And so we definitely have to be open to that, to the fact that will be happening around us and with our children, saying, okay, this is what's on the table right now. Let's talk about it. Let's not just throw it out. Let's actually go through some questions. Is this idea that has been presented in our society today, is this something that we should accept and embody and change the way that we live because of that new belief? Or do we need to ask some questions and say, okay, that doesn't really line up, no matter what society might be saying or not saying. It just doesn't really line up. It doesn't come out as a good logical way of thinking, and we're not going to accept this. We're not going to say that this is the right way to move forward,
Do you think that's one of the most important reasons to read the great books, is to see how ideas have come and been introduced and how people responded to them, and almost give us a template on how to ingest new ideas, ponder them, and then think of them based on a foundation of our beliefs and a foundation of what we've read?
Absolutely. And I think that, we're in one time period right now.
I know, we've got so much to cover.
We have so much to cover.
Yeah.
And I do think that it might be an old saying that her history needs to be our guide, that there is nothing new under the sun, that humans today think and act very similarly to how people did historically. Now, obviously, there is much more civilization today. At this time period, there was just, to live at this time period when there was so much violence would have been just so different, right? I mean, we live in a time where we are so incredibly blessed that we have a physical peace, that there's not just war going on every turn.
Yes.
That we take, but there are a lot of big questions that kind of war within us, of different things that we have to really work through as a people to keep our civilization improving.
Yeah, and then the bigger question is, what does improvement look like? That's where the really the forefront of the war is fought, right? What is improvement? That's the intellectual war. Is improvement this way, or is improvement this way? And I feel that when you read the great books, you'll actually see patterns of these ideas that have already been tested and have either failed or succeeded. And so I feel like when you know about the works, but you don't know what they say, then you're bound to make the same mistakes as these made when they flopped. And that's what I'm really hoping most to enjoy and pursue within these works, is to have more of a core fundamental understanding for myself. So when an idea is presented to me, I can say, oh, that idea came from this man, or this, this work, or this collection of works. And I know it failed, or I know it succeeded, or I know this is a part of it that it still exists in society, and this is why. Rather than saying, oh, that looks like this, but not even knowing what this is, what the this is. And so that's my hope in reading these, is to be a liberally educated individual.
And like I said, as I was reading kind of around this work and the context, some scholars say that there was some truth in his immaturity of the time of this work. He was much younger. And then, as he matured and kind of, sifted and just worked with his thoughts, his thoughts matured over time to more of what we know Socrates now to have been. Yeah. And I think that he would have just had that idea of, you got to ask questions, keep asking questions, and don't just sit where you feel like you should sit. Okay, like this feels right to me, and that's where I'm moving forward. You have to keep asking questions.
Just gonna sit there no matter what, come hell or high water.
Yeah,
this is what I believe. This is what I believe, and I think there's good to have foundational beliefs, but I think a lot of the other beliefs should be tested. I think you should test against all kinds of different fronts if your arguments stand up, because some will be crushed under the pressure, and some will reside, and some will triumph in strength.
So I want to ask the question to myself, to you, and to our listeners.
Yeah.
Something that comes out of this work, I think, is the question of what is something that I want, but the results might come back to bite me. And I think that is from beginning to end with the father saying, I want to get out of these debts. I don't want to be sued. And so I'm going to go about this whole strategy that honestly is wrong. And in the end, it came back to bite him because he ended up with his son disrespecting him.
Yeah.
And he thought his son was going to be on his side. But when somebody takes the wrong argument, it's going to turn against everybody, right?
Yeah.
Because we only look out for ourselves, honestly. And so the son went through this whole process of learning the wrong argument, and he even turned on his dad.
He applied it to himself.
Yeah. It's about me now.
Yeah.
And so what is something that I want? And then I go through this whole process that might be right or wrong, but the result will come back to bite me. And so I think that goes back to our episode about desire. And we all have desires, and we have to really take hold of those desires and apply them in the right way, and sometimes have to even withhold our desire.
I think for me personally, if it's an actual question, is it an actual
Yes.
question? Okay. I think my strongest desire on the day-to-day is optimization. I am obsessed with optimizing my time, my work, and my children are anti-optimizers. Everything that they do is the antithesis of optimization, right? It's all fun and play and chaos and disorder, and I don't like it. But I think when I try to optimize, I'm rejecting their spirit of creativity. And I am trying to trade creativity for compliance in my daily workflow. And so what I need to do is embrace their creativity, find out how I can optimize during the times when they are not present, and open up myself to creativity and spontaneity when they are. Because, like you just said, what is the backside of optimization when my children are frustrated that I'm always just trying to get things done? I'm always just being focused. Don't disturb. Stay in order. Sit down. Be quiet, right? Like that's what I want. If I'm saying my own desire, but what bites me is then I have children that are uncreative, which I want. I want creative children. I have children that do not play and work. Good work is play, and good play is good work. And so I will stifle that if I lean into optimization too hard. If I don't make space for my children, then it will bite me, and I will have possibly a Phidippides one day. Hopefully not beating me, but if I were to go down that road, resentment would breed, I believe. And I'm already guilty of it. And thank you for this conviction. I'll have to work on it daily.
Okay. I do like your approach of something that is good. And I have so many things in my life, and I don't have a specific, but I did want to ask that question to our audience to reflect on what is something that you want and you're like willing to go get it, whether it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
And it's going to turn around and bite you. I think it's such an important question to always ask ourselves as we pursue something. Okay, do I really want to be pursuing it this way? Because what is going to be the results?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that. This whole channel, the whole purpose of it is to help ourselves and help others build a life we love to wake up to. Mm-hmm. And it's so easy to build this life, this pod of life, just totally optimized, totally loving to wake up to it. But then this pod over here is like, it's like a confetti party. It's just exploding, and bad confetti, not good confetti, right? And so building a life you love to wake up to is a life of balance. And so let's say, you could work these 2 jobs and make a ton of money, or work this one job and have a great family life and have a good amount of money. Well, that might be a better life to wake up to than a lot of money with a dysfunctional family life. Obviously we want to have our expenses covered. We want to have a little bit of, income to do the fun things of life. But do we need as much as we think we do? And I'm even talking to myself right now, And so maybe we have to draw back a little bit. Like we talked about a couple weeks ago. Maybe the two jobs that people are working, the wife and the husband are working, but the kids are just kind of falling apart. What needs to happen there? Some decisions we had to make.
Yeah.
You were a nurse making good money. I was a graphic designer making not good money, but you quit. That's kind of insane.
Yeah, I did.
Right?
I was like, you can support us.
You can
then.
figure it out. And we did. But that's not to say that hasn't caused some fallout that we're now having to work on in our marriage, with our children.
But it was the right decision.
It was the
right
right decision. It was a good decision. But that good decision came with baggage, as all decisions do. And so you have to assess the positives and the negatives of a decision.
But this comes, I think, with the whole principle of, are we going to pay now or are we going to pay later?
That's a good principle.
And
what is that principle? Talk about that. Maybe you can apply it to something.
Well, I'll just apply it to the fact that, you were working at a non-for-profit graphic designer, little pay.
Very little.
I'm a nurse. We're, a year out of college, and I'm like, I want to have a baby, and we do, and I'm like, I'll go back to work. 2 weeks before I'm supposed to go back to work, Ben, I'm not going to go back to work. Please don't make me go back to work. I want to be home with our children, and we do it. And all with the idea of, okay, it's going to be really, really hard now.
Yeah.
And it's okay, though, because we're young. We only have one child at this point. Our house is very small. Yeah. And from this point, it only can go uphill from here, right?
Yeah.
And so we paid the price at the beginning, and it was hard.
Yep.
But if we hadn't have done it then, if I had continued to go to work, and then we had our second child and our third, and now we have 4 children, and all of a sudden we have a bigger house because we have to get a bigger house for our 4 children, and we kind of got used to the money, and it's nice and it's comfortable, and we're taking some trips every now and then.
Yep.
And then one day I wake up and our family's kind of a mess, and I say, well, maybe I should quit now. That's going to be much harder, but if we decide to do it, we got to pay. So do we want to pay now or pay later?
Exactly.
And so I think we all have to live with that. And we just have to assess the situation and understand that it might be hard now, but just delaying it isn't going to make it any easier later. Even though I think we often convince ourselves that it will be. Because it would have been so easy for you or I to have said, well, if I just keep working, we can put away some money. We can save more. Yeah. And we'll just try to live off of your income and save mine so that when I do quit, we have savings. Yeah. But in reality, that's a hard decision. And when the money's just kind of sitting there in a bank account, it would have just been, asking for us to use it.
Yep.
Or, we have emergencies, we have to use it. But if the money's not there at all, well, you're just SOL, so you got to figure it out.
Yeah, you're forced, and we're gonna do a whole series on finance. We've talked about that. You're forced into a budget, right? We were forced to stay with one car. We shared a car for the first 4 years of our marriage. 5 years? 5 years.
Yeah, we just got 2 cars last year.
Yeah, last year we just got 2 cars. So almost 6 years, we're sharing a car, and I'm biking to work, and, you're home with the baby doing barely anything. We're living off of $60 a week, right? And just
for
groceries. Yeah. And just
not just $60.
Yeah,
no. I don't know if we could do that.
That would
in
be
America.
crazy. Yeah. But just we were down, we just slimmed it out. Just got really skinny. And then I was working, trying to build a business, to make up that nursing income. That was goal number 1. And I think all of this is the idea of Strepsiades didn't think about the results. That's what it looks like. It was, my son wants something. I'm just gonna try and honestly shut him up and buy the thing because I don't like my wife. I don't like my son. I don't like my life. Let's just try and make it work. And that's really what the attitude he seemed to have. And that is not, that just does not seem like a life that he loved to wake up to, all said and done, right? And so, like I said, that was my biggest takeaway was, man, let's get serious about the life that we are waking up to. Let's have hard conversations. Let's make hard decisions. Let's have character so we can roll over, get out of bed, look in the mirror and say, okay, I can at least say that I made a good decision yesterday, the day before.
I like it. I think that sums up the clouds pretty well.
Cool.
I enjoyed reading it. It was very entertaining.
Yes, yours was more entertaining. I listened to it and then I read it, and the translation that we have here in the Great Books collection was so much funnier. That's why I took it as a serious work at first. When you came to me, you're like, "Oh my gosh, it's so funny." I was like, "I mean, kinda," and then I read it and I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is crazy."
Translated by David Barrett and Alan Summerstein, I think.
Okay.
Summerstein.
Summerstein, gotcha. So that was the translation that we read.
I liked it.
Cool. Well, if y'all are, still hanging here at the end of the episode, we've transitioned to the 10-year reading plan, which takes us a little bit more variety of work. We're no longer doing the straight read through, just to kind of catch you up on what's going on here on our front. And we plan on doing continuing to read through the great books, but also a couple like pop-up series on finance, on optimization, and all that. So we really hope you'll subscribe, stay a part of the great conversation, and just comment. Just tell us who you are, what you're going through, and what you want to see out of this life that you hope to love to wake up to. See you on the next episode.